In the ashes of a world at war, whispers survived that were never meant to be heard. Crates sealed in darkness, transmissions echoing long after the guns fell silent, men who carried secrets so heavy they vanished without trace. These are not tales of glory, but of shadows, where history was rewritten and the truth locked away behind walls of silence. Step carefully. Some doors, once opened, reveal horrors that were meant to stay buried. On April 15, 1945, 3 weeks before Hitler's suicide in the Führerbunker, a heavily guarded German military train departed Dresden under the cover of darkness. It carried no ordinary cargo. According to scattered fragments of Wehrmacht rail logs, the transport was classified under Operation Edelweiss II, a codename with no surviving official documentation. The only evidence of its existence comes from fragments of Soviet after-action reports and a handful of heavily redacted US Army intelligence files. What the train carried, and what happened to it, remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the war's end. The train was believed to be under the command of Oberstleutnant Ernst Krüger, an officer within the Heereswaffenamt, the German Army's weapons bureau. Survivors from the Dresden rail yards later told Allied investigators that the train was sealed, its windows welded shut, and its cargo loaded in uniform steel containers with SS runes etched onto the sides. A local railway worker, interviewed by Soviet intelligence in 1946, recalled that guards from the SS Totenkopfverbände shot one civilian for getting too close to the platform that night. The atmosphere was described as panic cloaked in secrecy. By April, Dresden was a ruined city. Allied bombing had left it smoldering, and Soviet armor was approaching from the east. For a train to leave under such conditions, and under such strict guard, indicates something of immense value or immense danger. The official manifest listed only engineering equipment, but fragments of US Signal Intelligence Service decrypts, released in the 1990s, refer to Uranhaltiges material, uranium-bearing material. The train's intended route was through Freiburg and onward toward the Ore Mountains, a region riddled with abandoned mines and tunnels. These mountains would later become part of the Soviet occupation zone. Several historians suspect the Nazis intended to hide the cargo in one of the countless mines, to be retrieved later for post-war resistance or bargaining. The train was last confirmed by Allied reconnaissance photographs dated April 16, 1945. An aerial image shows tracks near Altenburg scorched and warped, as if destroyed by fire. But curiously, no wreckage of the train appears in the photo, only twisted steel and a blackened scar across the earth. When Soviet forces secured the area days later, they reported no rolling stock present. One Soviet engineer's diary, recovered decades later, notes high radiation readings along the tracks, though his entry was abruptly crossed out in red pencil by his superior. In 1952, during the early Cold War, the CIA compiled a classified file titled The Altenburg Incident. The file, partially declassified in 2004, contains testimony from Captain James Alden of the US Counterintelligence Corps, who was dispatched to Saxony in July 1945. Alden interviewed locals who described Soviet troops cordoning off a 3-mile stretch of railway near Geising. Villagers recalled soldiers wearing protective masks and carrying equipment they had never seen before. Trucks left the site at night, their cargo covered by heavy tarps. Soon after, Soviet reports of soldiers falling ill began to circulate, though no official acknowledgement was ever made. The most disturbing piece of evidence is a translated Soviet cable dated August 1945, sent from the NKVD headquarters in Dresden to Moscow. The cable refers to materials consistent with atomic program, secured from transport near Altenburg. This cable was discovered only because a British signals officer, working under the Venona Project, intercepted and archived it. By the time the Venona decrypts were publicly acknowledged decades later, the train itself had become little more than legend. The question of what disappeared that night is compounded by the sudden deaths of several Allied officers assigned to investigate. Major Harold Whitman of the US Army's G2 intelligence section was killed in a car accident in Frankfurt in 1947. just days before he was scheduled to brief officials on captured German nuclear research. His notes on the Altenburg site vanished from US archives. Similarly, Soviet Colonel Alexei Voronin, who supervised the recovery effort, reportedly died of acute illness in Moscow within months of returning. His widow later told researchers that she was warned never to speak of his work in Saxony. During the 1960s, rumors resurfaced when NATO conducted exercises near the Ore Mountains. West German newspapers reported that sections of the forest were suddenly sealed off by American military police, allegedly due to unexploded ordnance. However, former Bundeswehr soldiers interviewed years later claimed the real reason was something buried. A retired officer from the German Federal Intelligence Service, BND, admitted under anonymity that Western intelligence had monitored anomalous readings in the Altenburg sector throughout the Cold War. Some historians dismiss the entire affair as a conflation of Nazi gold train myths and Cold War paranoia. Others argue it was the Reich's last attempt to smuggle nuclear materials out of Germany before inevitable defeat. A few fringe researchers insist the cargo may have been an early prototype of a radiological device, the so-called dirty bomb, described in scattered German technical notes. In 2015, Polish treasure hunters searching for the legendary Nazi gold train near Schwalbe claimed to have uncovered ground-penetrating radar images showing a buried train in the Ore Mountains. Their findings were quickly discredited by state authorities, but not before sparking renewed speculation. That same year, the German Federal Archive quietly released a heavily censored Wehrmacht rail log from April 1945, with a single line referencing Edelweiss 2, transport complete. No further entries followed. Today, no trace of the train or its cargo has ever been recovered. The Altenburg railway line was rebuilt in the 1950s, and any remaining evidence was likely buried beneath tons of earth. Yet the shadows of Operation Edelweiss II remain. Somewhere between the ruins of Dresden and the tunnels of the Ore Mountains, an entire train, and perhaps the Reich's final gamble at atomic leverage, disappeared without explanation. 75. Years later, the official record still reads, "No train recovered." On May 21, 1945, just weeks after Germany's surrender, a detachment of the US Army's 83rd Engineer Battalion was dispatched to investigate an abandoned salt mine near Kassel. The site had been marked on a map seized from a retreating SS officer. According to field reports later unearthed in the National Archives, the Americans discovered dozens of sealed crates stacked deep inside the mine shafts. The containers bore black SS runes, and stenciled across their sides was a single word: Morgenrot, Red Dawn. At first glance, the engineers assumed they had stumbled across looted art or industrial supplies. Kassel and its surrounding regions were rife with caches of stolen material, hastily hidden as the Third Reich collapsed. But the crates inside this mine were different. They were welded shut, reinforced with lead, and surrounded by warning placards, marked with the Reichsadler and the words Gefahrstoff, Hochgeheim, dangerous material, top secret. Captain William Carter, the officer in charge, filed a brief describing the discovery. His notes, declassified decades later, record an unsettling detail. Several soldiers reported a sharp, metallic taste in their mouths after spending less than 30 minutes underground. Others experienced nausea and disorientation. Carter immediately ordered respirators and Geiger counters from headquarters in Frankfurt. When they arrived, readings taken inside the mine were said to be elevated, though not catastrophic. The official Army Corps of Engineers report described the site as contaminated, possibly with industrial radiological material. The salmon crates were carefully hoisted from the mine and transported to a temporary facility near Göttingen. But within 48 hours, orders arrived from higher command. The materials were to be resealed and returned to the mine. No explanation was given. Carter's unit complied, under protest. Witnesses later recalled that US military police established a cordon around the site, preventing all access. By June, the entrances had been collapsed with demolition charges, burying the entire cache under tons of rock. What could have compelled Allied command to hide rather than secure the material? Surviving fragments of German documentation provide a clue. A captured SS officer from the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, interrogated in Wiesbaden, claimed the mine held prototypes of a chemical compound developed under Projekt Morgenrot. According to him, the program was a collaboration between the Luftwaffe's Erprobungsstelle, Testing Command, and IG Farben's Chemical Division. The compound was designed as a dispersal agent for long-range bomber attacks, with properties beyond any known battlefield chemical. When pressed for details, the officer refused to elaborate, citing the Geheime Reichssache classification, secret state matter. Weeks later, he was transferred to a holding camp and disappeared from the record. The mystery deepened in 1961 during NATO military maneuvers in Hesse. Bundeswehr units conducting exercises near Kassel reported stumbling across a collapsed tunnel mouth, emitting what they described as sickly, acrid fumes. US Army Chemical Corps personnel were immediately deployed. Locals recall roads being blocked for days, while men in protective gear worked under floodlights through the night. When questioned afterward, German civilian authorities were told it was an unexploded ordnance clearance operation. Yet internal, Bundeswehr memoranda, later leaked to a West German newspaper, described sustained hazardous emissions consistent with chemical storage. Once again, the tunnels were resealed, this time under concrete and steel. Projekt Morgenrot remains, absent from official German wartime archives. No complete files have ever been found. What survives are scattered references. A memo from IG Farben to the Reich Air Ministry, dated February 1944, discussing an additive with destabilizing atmospheric qualities. A Luftwaffe logistics requisition for specialized dispersion tanks, labeled under Morgenrot, and a cryptic entry in Albert Speer's post-war notes, where he writes of an unacceptable weapon unfit for civilized conflict. In 1978, the Der Spiegel magazine published a controversial article citing unnamed NATO sources, who claimed the US had covertly removed some Morgenrot samples in 1945 before resealing the mine. The article alleged that portions were sent to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, where Army chemical researchers attempted, and failed, to replicate the compound. The US Department of Defense dismissed the report as speculative nonsense. However, documents released through the Freedom of Information Act in the 1990s revealed at least one reference to a Kassel material sample tested at Edgewood Arsenal in the late 1940s. The test results remain redacted. Adding to the suspicion, former Soviet chemical warfare scientists have claimed Moscow also investigated Morgenrot. In a 1993 interview, Dr. Sergei Petrov, once attached to the Red Army's Scientific Technical Directorate, stated that our intelligence was aware of the Americans burying something at Kassel. We assumed it was either nerve agents or radiological experiments. We sent expeditions in 1947, but the site was already sealed. We concluded the Americans feared what was inside more than they desired it. Eyewitness accounts from local residents support the notion that something dangerous lies beneath the earth. Elderly villagers in the Kassel region recall livestock deaths and unexplained sickness near the mine entrances during the summer of 1945. One farmer's diary entry from June 2, 1945 notes, "Cows foaming at the mouth, soldiers came with masks, told us to leave." Such accounts were dismissed at the time as post-war rumor. Today, the Kassel site remains closed, the entrances obliterated. German federal authorities list it officially as unusable terrain due to subsidence. But restricted Bundeswehr maps still mark the location with a black cross and the notation "Betreten verboten," entry forbidden. No environmental surveys have ever been published. Was Projekt Morgenrot a last-ditch Nazi attempt to weaponize unknown chemistry? A precursor to modern nerve agents, or something entirely different, an experiment too unstable for use, yet too dangerous to destroy? The absence of documentation, combined with repeated efforts to reseal the site, suggests the material still poses a hazard. The Americans who first uncovered it in 1945 were ordered not to retrieve it, but to bury it, quickly and decisively. That decision may speak louder than any archive. The files that remain are fragmented, the testimonies contradictory, but one chilling truth emerges from all accounts. Inside a salt mine near Kassel, beneath collapsed tunnels and layers of silence, lie the remains of a weapon designed to change the face of war, and one that even its creators may have feared to unleash. In the winter of 1947, as Europe struggled through the rubble of post-war recovery, a curious anomaly was detected above the Arctic Circle. British listening stations in Scotland and Norway began intercepting faint, irregular radio broadcasts, transmitting in groups of numbers. The sequences resembled the format of wartime numbers stations, a cipher system once used by the Kriegsmarine to communicate with U-boat crews. Yet Germany had surrendered 2 years earlier. The signals should not have existed. Alarmed, the newly formed CIA initiated a joint program with MI6, codenamed Operation Harrowfield. Its objective was straightforward: locate the source of these rogue transmissions and determine whether remnants of the Nazi war machine were still active in the frozen north. The Americans recruited a handful of former Wehrmacht Funkmänner, experienced radio operators once stationed on Atlantic U-boats, under the condition that their wartime records would be expunged. Officially, they were now technical consultants. Unofficially, they were indispensable. The first confirmed intercept was logged on March 2, 1947. The signal emanated from somewhere near the Lofoten archipelago in northern Norway, a region that had hosted fortified U-boat pens during the war. The message consisted of 4 sets of 5-digit numbers, repeated 3 times before abruptly cutting off. Decoders at Bletchley Park attempted to break the sequence but found the cipher too close to surviving Kriegsmarine Enigma variations. To solve it, they turned to the German operators who had once manned those very machines. One of them, a former Oberfunkmat named Hans Keller, reportedly went pale when he heard the intercepts. "This is no copy," he told his American handlers. "This is authentic procedure. Someone is still out there." By late spring, additional transmissions were recorded, always at irregular intervals, always in the dead of night. Direction finding. Triangulation traced them to abandoned U-boat pens carved into the fjords near Narvik. In July, a combined Anglo-American reconnaissance team was dispatched. The operation's after-action report, though heavily redacted, describes what they found. Vast underground pens stripped bare, machinery removed as if dismantled in haste, and living quarters with beds still warm. But there was no trace of the transmitting equipment. Only heavy cable scars along the walls suggested radio apparatus had been in place until very recently. The absence of tangible evidence unsettled Allied command. The team withdrew, leaving behind monitoring posts. Yet within weeks the signals resumed, this time traced even farther north, into the Barents Sea. They were now accompanied by bursts of Morse code, transmitting obsolete Kriegsmarine call signs that had been decommissioned in 1945. It was as if the ghost of the U-boat fleet still lingered, calling to no one. In 1949, a joint CIA-MI6 memorandum raised the possibility that these signals were part of a Soviet deception campaign designed to sow paranoia and distract Western intelligence resources. The Kremlin had certainly inherited much of Germany's naval infrastructure in Norway and East Prussia, but a subsequent classified assessment by the US Naval Communications Intelligence Section dismissed the theory. The transmissions utilize authentic Kriegsmarine codes, some of which were never compromised by Allied codebreakers. It is highly unlikely the Soviets have mastered them. Then came the most disturbing incident. On January 18, 1951, a Norwegian trawler reported sighting a surfaced submarine near Jan Mayen Island. The vessel was described as German type, grey hull bearing no flag. Before Norwegian patrol boats could intercept, the submarine submerged and vanished beneath the polar ice. Officially, the sighting was dismissed as a misidentified Soviet submarine. Unofficially, Operation Harrowfield went into overdrive. Declassified CIA files from the 1970s reveal that mobile listening posts were established in Greenland, Iceland, and Svalbard. The transmissions, though sporadic, continued throughout the 1950s. Each followed the same pattern: blocks of numbers, repeated thrice, followed by a short silence. No reply was ever intercepted. The broadcasts appeared to be one-way instructions, commands sent to no known receiver. By 1963, the signals grew fainter, fading into the noise of Cold War communications. The CIA quietly wound down Harrowfield, declaring it unresolved but non-critical. Yet British GCHQ continued to monitor until at least 1974, when the final confirmed intercept was logged. Its contents remain classified, but a handwritten annotation in the file margin reads, "Same format, same code." Whoever they were, they never stopped. Theories abound as to what Harrowfield uncovered. Some believe the transmissions were the work of Nazi holdouts, die-hard loyalists operating from hidden bases in the Arctic, maintaining the illusion of a surviving command structure. Others argue they were automated broadcasts from equipment left running long after the war, powered by generators or even hydroelectric systems buried deep in the fjords. Still others whisper of unaccounted U-boats that fled to the polar seas, using the codes to maintain discipline in isolation. What is undeniable is the consistency of the signals. They were real, recorded, triangulated, and analyzed. They carried codes authentic to the German Navy, codes no Allied cryptographer could fully break, and they persisted for nearly 3 decades after the fall of Berlin. When pressed in the 1990s, the CIA acknowledged the existence of Operation Harrowfield, but declined to release full details, citing sources and methods still relevant to national security. The British government has never confirmed or denied involvement. Norway maintains silence on the matter, though archival hints suggest its navy quietly patrolled suspected sites well into the 1960s. Today, fragments of those intercepted transmissions survive in private collections, scratched recordings on reel-to-reel tape, static-filled but unmistakable, 5-digit sequences, flatly intoned in German, ending in a chilling silence. To some, they are evidence of nothing more than Cold War shadows, anomalies misinterpreted in the paranoia of the era. To others, they remain the faint echo of a fleet that refused to surrender, a coded voice from a Reich that should have been silenced in 1945. Operation Harrowfield's files end abruptly in 1974. The final entry reads simply, "Signal terminated. No further activity." But whether that meant the transmissions had ceased, or merely that they had moved beyond Allied reach, remains unknown. In October 1944, a Yugoslav partisan detachment moving through the forests of western Bosnia stumbled upon what they initially believed to be an abandoned Luftwaffe supply depot. The site, concealed beneath camouflage netting on the slopes of Mount Vlasic, contained a half-collapsed hangar and a series of concrete bunkers. Inside lay the shattered remains of an aircraft unlike any they had seen before. Its fuselage was compact, its wings stubby and truncated, and its undercarriage suggested vertical or near-vertical takeoff capability. Etched into a surviving blueprint, fragment was a codename: Projekt Schwalbe, Project Swallow. The partisans, more concerned with pressing the German retreat, sent word to Allied intelligence officers operating in the region. Within weeks, a British Special Operations Executive (SOE) team was dispatched to investigate. Their preliminary field report, filed in Bari on November 12, 1944, noted the aircraft appeared well beyond current operational capability. Among the wreckage they recovered were jet turbine components unfamiliar to Allied engineers, as well as sketches indicating a weapons payload intended for rapid urban strikes. The official documents, now scattered across archives in London and Washington, paint a disturbing picture. Schwalbe was reportedly a vertical takeoff and landing (VTOL) prototype, designed to bypass the vulnerability of conventional runways. Notes in captured German engineering files describe it as a Stadtzerstörer, city destroyer, intended for sudden, close-range bombing missions against Allied urban centres. One engineer's margin comment, scribbled in 1943, reads chillingly, "Perfect for London." The wreckage was photographed extensively by the SOE before the site was overrun once more by German forces in December. Though the partisans managed to deny the enemy full recovery, much of the surviving airframe was destroyed in the ensuing firefight. What little remained was eventually smuggled through the Adriatic into Allied hands. The British Air Ministry's post-war technical report, Confidential File Avia 1972 Schwalbe, acknowledged unprecedented lift mechanisms and speculated the design, if perfected, could have altered tactical dynamics of urban bombing campaigns. After the war, Schwalbe seemed to vanish into obscurity. The files were sealed, marked NE, non-existent, in public catalogues. When British researchers in the 1960s attempted to access the Avia series, they found the entries struck through in black ink. Inquiries met only with the reply, "No such project recorded." And yet, scattered evidence suggests otherwise. By 1950, Soviet aviation engineers unveiled the Yak-23 and later the Yak-36, early jet prototypes that bore striking similarities to the Schwalbe schematics. Former Luftwaffe scientists, captured and transferred to the USSR under Operation Ossoaviakim, were rumored to have carried knowledge of unfinished VTOL projects. One Soviet defector, interrogated in 1968, specifically referenced a German swallow plane tested in the Balkans. The United States, too, appeared to show interest. A declassified memorandum from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1952 refers obliquely to vertical thrust research, German origin, source Balkan theater. While the document offers no specifics, it coincides with early US experiments in VTOL aircraft during the 1950s and 60s. The lineage is circumstantial but suggestive. A prototype unearthed in Yugoslavia may have provided technical seeds later transplanted into Cold War aviation. For Yugoslav authorities, the discovery remained a point of suspicion for decades. Local villagers near Mount Vlasic whispered of strange night operations in 1945, when Allied trucks ferried away wreckage under tarps. Old men recalled boxes of drawings loaded onto C-47 transports bound for Italy. When interviewed in Sekiu, the 1970s, survivors swore that the foreigners did not want us to look. Perhaps most damning are the NATO archival redactions. Requests in the 1980s by aviation historians for records relating to German VTOL projects were denied, with the WWII reasoning that certain files may still have security implications. Why would a destroyed Nazi prototype, lost in the forests of Bosnia, remain classified 40 years later? Unless fragments had been quietly incorporated into ongoing weapons programs. What Schwalbe represented was not simply an experimental aircraft. It was the manifestation of a desperate Reich, seeking weapons so unconventional they could shift the balance of a losing war. In its vertical takeoff concept lay the potential for precision strikes against cities without warning. Without the need for vulnerable airbases, the Luftwaffe, already deploying V-1s and V-2s, envisioned Schwalbe as the manned counterpart, an aircraft that could rise vertically from hidden sites, deliver payloads, and vanish. But the prototype never reached operational status. The war ended before refinement was possible, and the Balkans, with their rugged terrain, were an unlikely proving ground. Still, the fragments revealed enough to unsettle Allied engineers. British Air Ministry correspondence hints at strategic relief that the design was incomplete, while simultaneously urging absolute silence regarding its existence. To this day, no complete blueprint has surfaced. What remains are partial sketches, faded photographs, and conflicting testimonies. In aviation museums, Schwalbe is absent, from exhibits on Nazi experimental aircraft, overshadowed by better-known projects like the Me-262 or V-2. Officially, it never existed. Unofficially, it lingers as a rumor in the classified corridors of both East and West, a reminder of the Reich's relentless pursuit of secret technology. Mount Vlasic itself holds no obvious traces today. Forest growth has swallowed the bunkers, and locals who remember the war are dwindling in number. Yet the echoes of Schwalbe persist in archival whispers, in redacted memos, in the eerie resemblance between post-war prototypes and the Balkan wreckage. Somewhere in the vaults of London, Washington, or Moscow, a file still bears the codename. And though history has buried it under layers of denial, the truth remains that in the last years of the war, the Reich tested an aircraft that should never have been built, an aircraft whose shadow stretched far into the Cold War sky. On June 9, 1946, inside a makeshift interrogation chamber in Rome, American officers of the Office of Strategic Services conducted a session with former SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Weiss, a mid-level functionary attached to Heinrich Himmler's personal staff. Weiss had been captured in northern Italy while attempting to flee under a false identity. During questioning, he made a startling claim that a dossier known internally as Die Schwarze Akte, the Black File, contained records of clandestine negotiations between Axis and Allied representatives during the final months of the war. The transcripts of that interrogation, partially declassified in 2003, reveal Weiss described the file as containing agreements, not rumors, including documentation of exchanges in which advanced German technology was allegedly traded for leniency towards selected SS officers. He named the Vatican as a temporary custodian of the material, suggesting that intermediaries had passed through Rome under protection of sympathetic clergy. The American interrogators, skeptical but intrigued, scheduled follow-up sessions. Weiss, however, never returned for them. On June 17, 1946, he was found dead in his cell. The official report listed suicide by hanging. The guards on duty that night were later reassigned, their statements contradictory and incomplete. For decades, the incident was a footnote in OSS archives. Then, in 1952, a memorandum surfaced in CIA files referencing Die Schwarze Akte once again. This time, the file was connected to missing crates of documents seized from the Vatican's wartime archives during an unexplained theft in late 1946. The crates, according to Vatican officials, contained only ecclesiastical records, yet a classified CIA summary noted correlation with Weiss testimony and warned of sensitive exposure of wartime negotiations if contents become public. But nay, the crates were never recovered. What might have been inside those vanished files has been pieced together only through hints and fragments. A British Foreign Office dispatch from January 1945 refers to discreet approaches by envoys, tied to the Reich Main Security Office, offering research documents concerning jet propulsion in exchange for a guarantee of passage. Similarly, an American intelligence cable from Bern, Switzerland, mentions the possibility of German delivery of strategic material should Allied forces agree to certain post-war arrangements. Both documents were buried under the label unsubstantiated, yet their phrasing echoes Weiss's claim. Scholars who have pursued the trail of Die Schwarze Akte note that a pattern emerges: sudden disappearances of mid-ranking SS personnel, inconsistencies in Allied custody rosters, and abrupt changes in the handling of German scientists. Operation Paperclip is often cited as the public face of this phenomenon, but the suggestion of parallel, unofficial channels, deals struck off the record, has never fully disappeared. The Black File, if real, may have been the ledger of those exchanges. There are darker possibilities as well. Rumors persist that Die Schwarze Akte contained not only records of technology transfers, but also evidence of Allied foreknowledge of Nazi atrocities. Several post-war testimonies from camp guards mention bargains with the enemy, and one 1947 French intelligence summary warned that disclosure of certain Vatican-held papers would irreparably damage relations with Washington. Whether this was bluster or an oblique reference to the Black File remains unknown. What is certain is that the trail of the file did not end in Rome. A 1964 Italian Carabinieri investigation into a break-in at a warehouse in Genoa uncovered shipping labels marked with the Vatican seal and American military codes. Among the items stolen were a dozen crates of wartime documents. Though officials insisted the contents were minor clerical files, a US embassy cable admitted privately that items of potential intelligence value had been taken. No suspects were apprehended, and the crates were never recovered. By the high 1970s, whispers of Die Schwarze Akte resurfaced in West German parliamentary debates on war crimes prosecutions. Opposition lawmakers accused the government of suppressing files proving that certain Nazi officials had been deliberately shielded during the Cold War. The term "black file" was used explicitly in one closed session, the minutes of which remain classified. Shortly after, Bundestag inquiries into wartime leniency agreements were abruptly terminated, citing national security. American interest did not fade either. In 1981, a Freedom of Information request for all documents related to the Black File returned a response. No responsive records located. Yet in the margin of one released file, a handwritten annotation by a CIA analyst reads simply, "See also, Rome, 1946. The slip, overlooked during redaction, was enough to confirm that the term was known internally. The most tantalizing fragment emerged in 1999, when a retired Polish archivist revealed he had catalogued a Soviet-era microfilm reel labeled Schwarze Akte. The reel, now lost, reportedly contained references to cooperative discussions between representatives of the German SS and Allied intermediaries, 1944-1945. The archivist claimed the reel was taken to Moscow in 1950 as part of Stalin's effort to collect compromising material on the West. Whether it survives in Russian archives remains unknown. To this day, the Black File is neither proven nor disproven. What endures are scattered references across Allied, Axis, and Vatican records, always oblique, always fragmentary. No government admits its existence. No complete copy has ever been found. But the persistence of its name in declassified documents, the unexplained deaths of those connected to it, and the missing crates of wartime papers from Rome and Genoa all point to something buried deeply beneath the official history of 1945. If Die Schwarze Akte truly existed, it may have been the most dangerous file of the 20th century, not because of what it revealed about Nazi crimes, but because of what it may have exposed about those who negotiated with them, those who struck bargains in the shadows as the world bled. The record ends where it began, with Otto Weiss in a Roman cell. His testimony, written by hand on a single surviving transcript page, concludes with one final line, underlined twice. The file will not vanish. It will be protected. It is too important to too many. After that silence. Decades have passed, yet the silence lingers like smoke that never clears. Files erased, witnesses silenced, weapons hidden in earth and ice, still waiting, still dangerous. What we found was never meant for daylight, and what remains hidden may yet define the cost of forgetting. History does not rest, it lies in wait, and the deeper we dig, the more we realize that the war never truly ended. It only went underground,